My name is Rachel Parent. I'm 15 years old, and I've been creating awareness about GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, since I was 12. So, if we've been eating GMOs for the last 20 years, what's the big deal? Many scientists say that GMOs are nothing to worry about. I'm not a scientist, but somehow the idea of eating food that contains its own bug killer sounds a bit strange to me. So I decided to learn all I could about these GMOs. Here's what I found. When first created, GMOs were supposed to increase yields, be better for the environment, give us more nutrition, and use less water. Sadly, after 2 decades, this wish has not come true. Corn, canola, soy, and sugar beets. The 4 GM crops that dominate our fields and our food do one of 2 things: create its own internal insecticide, or remain alive after being repeatedly sprayed with pesticides. So, what else has happened in these same 20 years? Global agriculture has made a huge shift. Industrialized farming, monocropping, plants hardwired with pesticides, chemical companies that own seeds, and the lawsuits to defend those patented seeds when they get blown into a neighbor's field. Slowly, I began finding studies that disagreed with the GMOs are awesome studies. Scientists around the world were asking questions and sometimes losing their jobs for asking those questions. It was easy to get confused, though. Which scientist should I believe? Which study was more accurate? Fortunately, it didn't take a scientist to figure things out. Even a 15-year-old can research enough to realize when a corporation pays for or coordinates a study and hires a third party to keep them from looking biased. The more I learned about GMOs, the more I began to wonder about their purpose. And the more I found out about their purpose, the more I began to worry about my future and the future of the planet. So, what is the purpose of genetic engineering? The argument you hear most often is to feed the world. The world already produces more than enough food. The real reason for hunger is poverty, as any global hunger or poverty organization around the world will tell you. When corporations control food, the cost of food goes up, making poverty worse. Another argument you might hear is that GMO crops increase yields. Many studies have proven that GMO crop yields are no better than conventional crops. So, if they aren't increasing yields, and they aren't feeding the world, what are they doing? They are dramatically increasing pesticide use. If you engineer a crop to withstand weed killer, you use weed killer more often because you're not afraid of hurting the crop. If you use weed killer more often, weeds evolve to resist it. But don't worry, the corporations have the answer to superweeds too. They are now engineering corn and soybean to be resistant to 2,4-D. You know, the key ingredient in Agent Orange to kill those huge evolved weeds. Corn chips, anyone? Beneficial insects are being harmed. Monarch butterflies need milkweed. But milkweed is almost gone thanks to all those weed killers. This year, the monarch population is at its lowest point in history. A 90% decline. And the same thing is happening with bees and pesticides all around the world. Other crops are being contaminated too. Seeds are spread by wind, water, bees, and birds. So what happens when these genetically engineered seeds start growing in the field next door? The organic crop gets contaminated. Meanwhile, the organic farmer is held liable to fix the problem, or worse, face a lawsuit for having illegally grown patented seeds in their field. That'd be like you being sued by your neighbor if he spray painted his house purple and some of it blew onto your house. Crazy, right? Nearly 2 decades after GMOs have been introduced into our diet, no long-term human health studies have been conducted. Although many animal feeding studies have been done. A study published by the journal showed that GMOs were actually decreasing yields. Another study showed that GMOs were actually related to allergies. This study was done by the Journal of Pediatrics. They showed food allergies in 1 in 12 children. Is there a connection? Dr. Thierry Vrain, a retired research scientist from Agriculture Canada, speculate that by inserting a foreign gene into the plant, it may be creating a new allergic response. As of today, 64 countries around the world already require mandatory GMO labeling, including the entire European Union, where they outright ban them. Canada and the US are the only 2 industrialized nations in the world that don't require mandatory GMO labeling. A couple of years ago, I was honored to meet with Dr. Seralini, a professor from the University of Caen, who conducted a 2-year feeding study on rats. The results were sobering. Organ damage, digestive disorders, immune system problems, tumors, even premature death. Other studies resulted in stillbirths and reproductive problems. I was only 11 years old when I first heard the word GMO and started learning all I could about the subject. I watched people purchase large amounts of chips, dips, sodas, and lemonades without ever knowing the ingredients had been genetically modified. That's when I knew I had to do something. But the issue was most Canadians had never heard about GMOs. So I decided to change that. It all started with my speech in grade 6 to inform my classmates. My first speech outside of school was for an environmental event with a huge audience of 12 people, 2 of which were my parents. But that didn't slow me down. I went bigger. I founded a nonprofit organization called Kids Right to Know. Our goal was to inform, educate, and motivate kids to make a difference and to take a stand. Our first Kids Right to Know march was downtown Toronto, November 2012, where I was joined by about 250 kids and parents. The following year, I was able to share my message with more than 3,000 people at my first march against Monsanto, which was pretty awesome. Not too long after, I was watching TV when I saw Kevin O'Leary on the Lang & O'Leary Exchange show. He said anyone who was marching against Monsanto was stupid, and if they didn't like GMOs, they should stop eating. I couldn't let that one go. So I publicly challenged him to a debate. I remember when I found out he accepted, I thought it was great news, but terrifying at the same time. I mean, think about it. A 14-year-old, grade 8 student going up against a very successful 60-year-old businessman known for speaking his mind. This was as David and Goliath as it gets. I have to admit, it was a little nerve-wracking. But in the end, I was happy with the results. Kevin admitted we were all in a long-term study because we've been eating GMOs for 2 decades. And Amanda, his co-host, summed it up by saying, "We are the lab rats." All along, my message has been simple. Just label it. We already label the things we feel are important for us to know. I mean, 50 years ago, we didn't label calories, salt, types of fat, or if it may contain nuts. But now we do. We even label things like made from concentrate, wild or farmed, and country of origin. Not because they're unsafe, but because consumers want to know. Food manufacturers didn't spend millions of dollars trying to hide these labeling changes. And they didn't raise the price of food to change the label. They simply responded to consumer demand and added them. So, why are these same food manufacturers and the biotech corporations telling us that we don't need GMOs labeled? If there's nothing wrong with GMOs, what are they trying to hide from us? To quote Dr. David Suzuki, any politician or scientist that tells you these GMO products is safe is either very stupid or lying. I may not be a scientist, and I may not hold a university degree yet. But I believe that we all deserve the right to know what's in our food. And we should all have the freedom to choose what we eat. The solution is simple to me. Just label it. And I hope you all share my vision in leaving the earth better than we found it. We owe this to ourselves and to the many generations yet to come. Thank you.